Can children nourish can children help nourish themselves? So Archana, she's the founder of Nourishing Schools Foundation, where she works at the intersection of food and education, and it brings in students to allow systems change to happen. Um, Her work really questions what are children eating? How can we look at larger systems? How can we shape what becomes available, affordable, desirable? Um, what I find really interesting about her work is that she's not looking at food simply as an intervention of nutrition, but as as an opportunity to include other actors within the work itself, particularly children, by connecting them to farmers, the local food, what can be done, etc. And I think her perspective is extremely relevant for all of us here because we want to transform food systems, right? So I'm very grateful to be able to attend this session and listen to Archana talk about her work. Thank you so much for coming. Yes, I'll hand over the mic to you.
Thank you, Rutuja, and thank you to the TDU team for inviting me to speak during this session. I'm looking forward to presenting our journey in front of all of you today and also hearing from you. Uh, Let me start by just sharing my screen. Are you all able to see this? I'm just going to full screen it.
Yeah, we can see it
Yes.
now.
Great. So, when I was asked to do this session, I think it was also a time of reflecting on how we have worked over the last decade or so. And truly, if you had told me 10 years back that I would be running a nonprofit focused on food systems literacy, I would not have believed you. It's something that wasn't planned down to the right last detail right from the beginning. It evolved over time by just staying curious, listening to different perspectives, and being willing to change direction. So that's really the motivating factors behind the journey I want to share with you today. What are the lessons that we've had? What is the evolution that we have seen while reaching out to about 100,000 children all over the country in the course of our work? What do we mean when we talk about food systems literacy? And what is it that children can do in this system? What are the roles they can play, which are far more than, as Rutuja was saying, than we give them credit for? What is that untapped potential that we can explore? So, to start with, this is a question, or rather, a topic that kept coming up in the work that I was doing. Uh, we often see children as the recipients of programs. We provide them with information and services, and we do all this in the hope that they will change. But at the same time, children themselves are making decisions every day about what to eat, where should that food come from, what to share with their peers and their families, and so on. And they are so important in the food system as actors. So, what if we look beyond just seeing them as beneficiaries? What if we also start seeing them as problem solvers? And this is the insight that has guided much of our work. So, I want to keep this session a little bit interactive. So, I would just request Rutuja if she could share a link to a quick Mentimeter question that we have in the chat. I'd love to also learn from you because food systems is such a big term, often seems like such a complex term. So when you think of food systems, what are some terms or phrases that come to mind for you? So I'll stop sharing my presentation for now. And Rutuja will just put a link in the chat, or if you like, I can paste it. Rutuja, do you have it handy? Okay. I will just paste it then. One second. I've just dropped it in the chat. And let's just wait a few minutes while you type out your responses. Great. I see a few responses that have started to come in. Let's maybe give it another minute. So, as you can probably see on the screen, it's a lot of interesting things that people have said. A food systems, in a sense, is like a food web. For some of you, it's about consumption. For some of you, it's about production of food. Specifically, it can be about nutritious local food. It's linked to culture. It's linked to markets as well. You're talking about big companies and the role that they play. It's linked to the farm as well, to people, to health, and where food comes from. So for us, what also comes to mind when we think about the word or the phrase food systems is also children and the role that they can play. So food for all is an interesting one that I see come up as well, and also scene of people eating, which is interesting. One is much more universal, and one is how does it relate to our day-to-day lives and what we see around us. So that's the great thing about something like food systems. It's both something that you relate to personally, but also something that you relate to as a more abstract, high-level concept. So for us, when we talk about food systems, we also talk about it as how do they place children at the center, right? And why is it that children matter in food systems? So one is that children are making food choices every day. They're making food choices when they're walking home from school, deciding what to buy on the way home, or when they're out with friends. They often influence the eating and dietary decisions for their families, right? And also, they come home from school, and a question that they get asked often is, what did you learn? So they're also passing on their knowledge. They're certainly future consumers in the sense of being able to eventually directly pay for whatever it's they want. So they'll be market drivers. Schools we've mentioned because schools are a place where you can reach children consistently, and they are also a place of building habits and a place of influencing food systems. Recently, you've probably seen that ICMR NIN has come out with a document that talks about the importance of school food environments because they've realized that so many decisions that children make as they relate to food and health are made in the school environment. And then there's also their connection to communities. Communities are their friends, their siblings, their parents, relatives, and so on, where they go on to influence so many of the choices that they make. And they in turn are also influenced by what the norms and the taste and the culture of the community is. So when we think about food systems, we place children right at the center of it, which has then led us to ask that what if every child had the capability to make informed decisions about their health, about their food, and their future? And that's how our work has evolved. So to date, excuse me, to date, we have reached 360 schools in several states across the country, impacting about 100,000 children. And to just share how our journey has evolved, it started much more with research. So for me, I worked for an international nonprofit, and I was supposed to conduct a research project to just learn more about what's driving changes in health and nutrition in India and what are some challenges, and spoke to various social entrepreneurs about that and learned a lot. At the same time, realized that there was a need to learn much more. So I worked with the organization to roll out these surveys in Karnataka and in Odisha in rural areas, serving almost 4,000 pregnant women and mothers of young children, because they're an important group when we talk about health and nutrition and so on. And we realized there that the gap was that so many programs were reaching out to pregnant women and young mothers because, in terms of nutrition, it's such a critical window of development. But at the same time, young people, adolescents were often missing from these programs, even though that's again such an important window of development, physical, cognitive, and is also a time when you're forming lifelong habits. So that made us think, what if we start focusing here? For two reasons. One is we consider this group to be the missing middle of a lot of programs. So you are targeted when you are in your mother's womb till you are 2 years of age, critical window. Then, usually from that point on, the number of interventions addressing children tends to drop off unless the child is a girl, grows up, becomes pregnant again, comes back into the focus area. In between, there's not that much that happens. So there are some programs aimed at them, but nothing compared to the volume of when they are much younger. The second is that often pregnancy is very late to start intervening. So, yes, that's your most critical period in terms of when you want to see the difference, but you often can't wait until a woman gets pregnant. Because, for instance, if that's going to be when you start, it might be too late to reverse things like severe anemia. So, we said, what if we start much before that? Much before women are pregnant, before they get married? And what if we also involve men? Because we do know that men are important decision makers from the household level right up to the village level and so on, right? They have to see the importance of food systems and nutrition too, and think about what they can do in actors in that space. So we did all of that and developed then 2014 onwards a resource kit for schools. The idea was that this was going to make learning about topics related to health, nutrition, agriculture, hygiene, climate, and so on easy to understand and engaging for children and to focus on their behaviors. And that led to the launch of our pilot program in 14 schools in Maharashtra. This was a really interesting time in terms of helping us understand so much about what are the needs, how can we keep tweaking the program so it's more effective, how do we work well with partners, how do we also align with government priorities, and so on. And then 2016 onwards, we started focusing on institutionalizing a lot of what we had done. So we set up the Nourishing Schools Foundation, which is the nonprofit that I'm leading now, and we expanded the program into regions beyond Maharashtra, into Rajasthan, Assam, and Tamil Nadu. And that was the focus until the pandemic. The pandemic also, since so many schools were shut for extended periods, made us realize that there was a need to digitize a lot of our content so that we could reach children through other channels, even if they were not attending school. So you could send them a link through messaging platforms or through their teacher community groups, etc. Still find ways to engage them. We did that. We also established government partnerships, such as in Karnataka and in Delhi. In fact, this year we are also expanding into Madhya Pradesh. And we realized that we need to work even more on strengthening our partnerships. So we joined coalitions and networks, such as the Coalition for Food Systems Transformation, that is one of the organizations involved even in these sessions that are being conducted, and the food systems transformation network that's been set up for the youth. So that in a nutshell is how our journey evolved. And as the journey evolved, our thinking also evolved. At the beginning, when we were doing nutrition, quite frankly, we were thinking about, when we were doing research, we were thinking about nutrition in a very narrow sense of things. We were looking at it in terms of healthy diets. And then as we started to work on it, we saw the connections with other topics. So, what do we mean then when we talk about food systems literacy, right? We see that it's connected to so many other things. It's, of course, about food, but it's also about agriculture. There's the aspect of consumption and access of water, and also how water is connected to agriculture. You really can't talk about agriculture today without bringing in climate. It's a topic that's also being discussed at a policy level. How do we make agriculture more climate resilient, both in India and globally? We have to recognize that there is a role that markets have to play, and that a lot of what people are demanding also has to do with culture. What are the local traditions and beliefs that they have around food, how taste has developed, and then the fact that what we eat and where it comes from, and sometimes even how we dispose of the excess food that's there. These are all things that are connected to our health. And in the course of doing this, we had to often question a lot of our own assumptions as well as assumptions of other entities about food systems. So, one is that people often think that food systems is just about farming, right? And it is so much more than that, as I was talking about in the previous slide. It's connected to so many other topics. Similarly, there are those who think, oh, nutrition is only a health issue. And these kind of assumptions are important because you might often see someone who's working in agriculture and then says, okay, I'm only working on agriculture. My work is not connected to nutrition. But farmers, what they eat is so strongly influenced by what they grow. So that connection exists. Similarly, someone working in nutrition might say, well, I'm under the ambit of health. So they don't connect it as much with something like agriculture also, or let's say climate, even though all of these are clearly factors that are influencing nutrition. So it's important to step out of that sector focus that we might have. The third is that people might often say that children don't influence food choices. But more and more, we are seeing that it's not that children just eat whatever is given. I feel like when people say children cannot influence food choices, that is almost an extension of what used to be said before that children should be seen and not heard. It's very different now, right? Children are very vocal from a very young age about their preferences about everything. And even something as simple as a tiffin that I'm showing here, you can ask any parent what a contentious topic it is nowadays to plan a tiffin because children will have some very strong views and preferences about what they want, what they don't want. And that's also influenced by what their friends are bringing. Similarly, even when you have school meals, local food preferences play a part in planning them and so on. The fourth one is that schools only teach academic subjects, and that should be their only focus. So they're primarily about helping you learn to read, learn numeracy, and then building up on that. However, I think if we look back and think about our experiences in school, it was all about developing skills that were going to help us thrive long after school. And of course, literacy and numeracy are a part of that, but it takes much more than that as well. So many of us have thought of school as the place where we were able to develop lifelong habits, where we were able to develop our confidence. And so all of that can connect back into ways that we talk about schools, teaching children about food systems as well. And the last one is the assumption that changing behaviors only requires information. If only people knew, then they would change their behavior. But I can speak for myself personally. There are so many things I know I should be doing, right? To be healthier, to even eat healthier. But I may not always practice them because there's so many other factors that you have to consider. So I'm sharing all of these assumptions because then they also ended up making us realize how food systems literacy is different from nutrition education. When we talk about nutrition education, the focus is often what should I eat? But food systems literacy is about why does my food system look like this? So you kind of take a step back and think about all the things that happen before you even make that decision of what you want to have for lunch, dinner, breakfast. Now, in nutrition education, you talk a lot about individual behavior, but individuals do not operate in isolation. So, food systems literacy also looks at what is that larger system that I'm a part of that influences a lot of individual behaviors. Similarly, nutrition education is often just linked only to healthy diets, whereas since we are looking at an entire system, we look at the connection between health, nutrition, agriculture, climate, and livelihoods. And the last one is that it's not just about information, it's also about developing agency and action. So, the way that we have focused in our work in building food systems literacy is knowledge is, of course, an important starting point. It's a necessary but not a sufficient condition. So, we do start there. We help children understand what they need to know about food in terms of the nutrients they get from different foods, how does it impact their health, what are some factors that they need to be mindful of in their environment. Then we work on developing agency, helping children understand how they can make informed decisions and how they can change behavior. So in this photo here, you're seeing children who are running a hand washing campaign in their school. And you can see how they first start with themselves and start to then influence others around them. There's also that element of practice. We want them to apply what they have learned. So the games are what they engage with, and then they go on to think about what they can do in terms of setting up school gardens or community gardens, like these children in the photo here who've set up a community garden in Assam. And the last one is also then connecting it to the larger community, to their peers and families in terms of influence. So, for instance, in Rajasthan, where we work in rural areas, we are also engaging with farmer communities on climate resilient agriculture. And you can see even in the photo here that children are attending these meetings. And they are also sharing what they've learned about climate resilient agriculture in the school gardens. And then that's what's being applied in the farms as well by their parents. So all of these different components go into building food systems literacy. And in our case, how we have implemented our program is that we have a 2-year rollout process. We start by doing a baseline survey where we collect information about local dietary practices, hygiene related information, the nutritional status of students. The reason to do this is that all of these factors look very different in a government school in Delhi than they do in a government school in rural Rajasthan or a government school in rural Assam. So it's important to understand what are the environments in which we are rolling out the program. And then we share the overall results with the school and with the parents who also come in and visit. And that's when we roll out our resource kit for schools, which has the games and activities. And we tell them what might be a lot more useful for them, depending on the needs that we've identified in the baseline survey. We then do a midline survey at the end of 1 year to understand what the short term impact has been. And then in the second year, we give schools an upgraded toolkit, which has a lot of the activities that we covered in year one, but that also gives them additional things that they can do, especially to build on what they did in the school and start spreading it to the community outside the school, taking it to their homes and so on. And then we do an endline survey to see what our overall impact has been. That's our approach as an organization. I wouldn't say that this is the only approach that you can adopt, but for us, we're looking at what is that combination of data plus implementation that then you can use to create impact. I wanted to just show a couple of slides. So these are student ministers being appointed in the schools because we try to distribute the leadership of what we do in the school. So there's a food and nutrition minister, a hygiene and sanitation minister, and so on. That's appointed by the teacher, and they are in charge of conducting a lot of games and activities from the kid. These are from 4th to 9th grade in the schools. This is a game that's being played in one of the classrooms where students, as you can see, are playing it. This is another game that has to do with hygiene and sanitation, an often overlooked part of food systems literacy. There is also this, and I'd say this is one of the more pivotal aspects of our program, where we encourage, I'll just go back a second, encourage schools to go back, students to set up and run school gardens, which also then are used to supply produce to the midday meal, which is in line with the directive from the Ministry of Education. And this is the piece I was talking about, where we look to connect it to farming communities near the school wherever relevant. And we hold meetings around that as well. So again, I don't want this to just be me talking throughout. I also want us to keep this a bit interactive. So I'll just stop here and ask you to click on the link that I shared previously. And if you do that, I think it should now go to the next one and take you to another question where I would love to learn what has been the biggest influence on your food choices. So why don't we just take a few minutes for you to fill that out, and then we can see what your responses are.
Archana, you'll have to change the slide, and then the question will change for us.
All right, I have changed the slide. Is it changing for you yet?
Uh,
I think it should have changed now, yeah?
yeah.
Yeah, great. So we'll just give it a minute. Okay, let me just share my screen as we see some of the responses coming in. So it's interesting that for some of you, parents have been very important influencers in terms of your food choices. And then one person has said that it's for them, it's convenience, right? That's certainly an important factor. And I think a really important one, because many times things that we tell people to consume, they might be more nutritious, but the convenience of what they can get easily or quickly, that trumps a lot of other factors. Taste is certainly a part of it, right? I think it's not just with children, with anybody. If it's not something that appeals to our taste buds, it's not something that really becomes a regular part of our food choices. So this is an interesting mix, right? And yet we see that at least so far, nobody has said schools. Um, and that's an underutilized component. The audience also, I think, for this session is skewing older, so social media hasn't come up as the biggest influence. But more and more, we are seeing that social media is often driving a lot of food choices for people as well. So thank you for sharing that perspective. Let me get back to the presentation. So let me also then talk about what is it that worked? What are some lessons from our journey? So the first one is that children learn by doing. So children doing something with an activity is going to trump giving them a lecture any day. And so over the years, we've had to keep going back to our resource kit and seeing if it's engaging enough. And if it's something that's giving children the opportunity to learn much more from experiences than just simply providing them with information. Every year, we also revise our toolkit and phase out things that maybe are not engaging them as much and come up with additional activities based on some feedback that we've received from children as well as teachers. The second one is that local foods increase relevance. I think one of the great things about living in India is that our diets are so diverse. They change state to state, they change district to district, and it's important to keep adapting our content so that children and even teachers can see foods that they are familiar with. One of the photos I was showing earlier was of a child playing this game called the Guess Who game, where they hold up a card that has a photo of a particular food, and then their classmates read out clues about that food, including the nutritive properties of those foods. And one of the things we do is also provide a lot of blank cards with that game so that children can fill out some local foods that we might not be aware of. And then we will work with the team of nutritionists and dietitians that we consult with to populate more information and add cards to the games and so on. So it's important to keep adapting to whatever local is wherever we are. Cannot just create one kit with one kind of content for the entire country. The third is that teachers need simple, ready to use resources. So, content can be amazing and it can be technically very accurate. But if it's not easy to use, it's just going to lie in a corner of a classroom or the principal's room and just not get used. We have to find a way to make it really easy to understand because teachers have a lot on their plate, especially government school teachers. So if it's something that's very complex, with the best of intentions, it's not going to be something that they implement. And so every iteration of our resource kit, we have found ways to make it even easier to implement in schools. And I'd say that's a work in progress. The fourth lesson has been the role that parents play in learning beyond the classroom. I think if we just look back to this Mentimeter poll that we did, so many of you said that parents were key influencers for you, right? So we try and see how we can engage parents through schools as well. I spoke earlier about how when we're sharing the survey results, we invite parents to come and learn about what have we found out through surveys. When we are working in rural areas, we engage parents who are farmers as well, so children influence parents, parents influence children, and it's important to bring them into whatever we're doing with food systems literacy. The fifth one is, of course, that Government partnerships are essential if we're going to scale. And we also have to look at alignment with government priorities. What are the programs that they are doing around education, around nutrition, and find opportunities there. So, for instance, when we looked at data from our program in Rajasthan, we saw that because of the way that we've designed our content, it also helps improve reading comprehension. It also does help improve numeracy to an extent because a lot of setting up a school garden is doing things like calculating perimeter, area, and so on. So you can cover mathematical concepts there in an applied way. So the percentage of students who were scoring well in languages, in mathematics, can also improve in the process of helping children adopt and improve their food systems literacy. So it doesn't have to be done just different from as a separate thing from what schools are doing. And in terms of our impact, what we've seen when we've looked at data from the schools that we've covered is that there's been a reduction in children that are thin and severely thin in the schools that we've covered. This particularly is a data from a subset of schools covered by our program. There's been change in behaviors like an increase in the percentage of students who are using soap or sanitizer is usually how they refer to liquid soap to wash their hands. There's also students who report an increase in the consumption of fruits and vegetables. And that's all at the behavior level. We also want there to be change at the mindset level because earlier, like I said, we want children to see themselves as problem solvers for tackling malnutrition. So we also look for an improvement or an increase in children that believe that they can take charge of their own nutrition. I think once that mindset shift happens, then that's when you know that the change is going to go beyond just our direct period of intervention in the schools. That's when we are setting them up to be agents of change for the rest of their life. And while I talk about impact, I do want to emphasize that this is not something that any organization, including ours, can do alone. There's so many partners who have a role to play here. So there's partnerships with government, like what we've had in Karnataka, in Delhi, the collaboration that we are rolling out in Madhya Pradesh. There are also fantastic NGOs working in different states, some of whom are featured on this slide, that we've really had the privilege of partnering with. And they've been so helpful in helping us understand what are the local foods, partnering with us on implementation, identifying schools that could be great partners for something like this. There's the aspect of academia as well, where we want a lot of what we do to also inform the overall research that's happening around food systems. We also try to share our insights from our work in media so that we're helping more and more people see ways that they can get involved. And I spoke earlier about how, in this current phase of the evolution of our work, we are engaging more and more with coalitions as well and networks, because that's really critical if we're going to scale this idea beyond just one organization. Food systems literacy should not be something that one organization owns. It has to be something where everyone sees that they have a role to play. And I also think that's where you, in terms of people joining this call today and anybody watching this, have a role to play, right? When we talk about changing food systems, there's a role to play for education. TDU is running this excellent program where they are engaging college students as leaders, as youth leaders when it comes to food systems transformation. And I think that's so great. I wish that was something I had when I was in college because I really didn't understand food systems back then. And I was a student of economics, which I think is a subject that should engage because it's all about supply and demand. And you really have to work on both of those aspects if you're going to bring about a change in food systems. More and more, we are seeing ways that technology can be a tool for scale, a tool for change, and there are ways to leverage that. One aspect we saw in our work, of course, was digitizing a lot of our resources, but I'm sure there's so much more that can be done here. I would love to also see more research here, both in the aspect of theory, what should we be understanding better? So, for instance, to what extent does climate influence agriculture and vice versa? There's so much research happening now into the health effects of climate change. So many of us are living through the health effect of climate change. So there's that aspect of theory, but also research into applications. What kind of interventions are effective? What more can be done? There's a recent study that was done, for instance, in Tamil Nadu that found that if you can just equip teachers with basic knowledge on different aspects of health and nutrition, they feel so much more motivated and confident in then going on to spread that message to children. And what I thought was also interesting is that the study found that urban teachers right now are much more comfortable with this topic than rural teachers. And to me, that there's an opportunity there, right? Because you would think that given that rural areas are so much more connected to agriculture, teachers there should feel more equipped. But what we're seeing is that perhaps urban teachers are feeling like they have access to more information, more tools. So how can we change that? Because such a huge percentage of our population is living in rural areas. There's opportunity in terms of markets, in terms of entrepreneurship. Organizations have a role to play. I don't think this is just about what we can do in the social sector or in academic institution. Entrepreneurs, be it social entrepreneurs or even your just for-profit organizations, can bring about so much change here in terms of how they're taking decisions. And there's, of course, the role of policy in this place. In this space, there's the role of community action, whether it is farmer groups, whether it is school management committees, whether it is your parent networks, so on and so forth. And I've put a box for other pathways as well, because really this space keeps evolving, and I'm sure that there are pathways for making a difference that I haven't even put on this slide. And I think we all have a role to play in shaping that. So I'll stop here and thank you again, by the way, for joining the session so far and for sharing your perspective. I'd love to also open it up, if that's all right, for any comments or any questions for those of you who have joined.
Thanks so much, Archana.
Thanks.
We'll first take questions and comments from the participants, and then perhaps if there's time, me and Priya can also ask some. Is there anyone who has a question?
Hi, everyone.
Hello, Dhanya.
Yes,
Please go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm
Hi,
having a
Danya.
technical issue, so please forgive all of this. But I want to know, in your experience, how have the children really responded to it? I know you mentioned it in passing, but can you go a little more detail on that, please?
So I think for the most part, children have responded very positively to it, Dhanya. One is, I think, keeping the element of play really central to it has led to that positive response. I think if we had come in and just added an additional lecture or classroom session with them, it would not have been so engaging for them. But in a lot
Mm-hmm.
of schools in different states, for instance, there's something called a no bag day now, which is supposed to be a textbook free day. And at the same time, students don't often get opportunities to do something fun during that time. So when
Okay.
we come in and do that, I think that's something that they enjoy. The second is everyone remembers when they were children and you got a badge and you were put in charge of something. How great that felt, right? It felt like you suddenly had all this power to create change. And I see something very similar happen every time a teacher pins on a food and nutrition minister or a hygiene and sanitation minister, agriculture minister badge onto a student's shirt. So I think they also really enjoy that aspect of being in charge of something and getting that responsibility. And the third is that they're not passive recipients. I think in our surveys, children have often told us very clearly some things that we may have provided as a game or an activity that they didn't find engaging. There have definitely been instances where we spent months developing something and thought it was going to be very popular with children. And then the data is very clearly showing us it's not. And that's great to know because children, what I think is one of the great things about it is they're so honest and unfiltered, right? They will just tell you what they think. It's not always that they will tell you what you want to hear, and that's a great learning opportunity. So overall, when you're saying how have children responded, these are the things that for me have been particularly noticeable.
May I have a follow-up question to that? Yeah. So have the food choices really changed?
So again, from the surveys that we've done, we've seen that they have. And I think one of the reasons that happened is school gardens for sure. When a vegetable is something that a child grows, their relationship to that food changes, right? Because anybody knows that if you tell children to eat their vegetables, that's definitely not going to make them want to eat it. But when they grow it, I think it's very similar to when you make an art and crafts item at school. It could be the most unappealing thing to a general observer, but to you, you created it and now you want something like that to be used. I think it's the same with a vegetable. You grew it, so now you want to try it, you want your family to try it, and so on. So that's one. The second is that we try to also teach children a lot about healthier and more nutritious food choices through things like games where they learn about, okay, this food can help you combat this nutrient deficiency, this food is rich in this nutrient. So I feel like it slowly also makes them memorize what is an option that they could try out. And then even if one student or two students try it out, they talk to their peers. And at this age, children are very susceptible to peer influence. That also becomes a factor. So for sure, we've seen that the consumption of frequency of consumption of vegetable and fruits can go up once children engage with the program.
हेलो
Hi, Amit.
हेलो अर्चना जी आपने एक बार कहा था कि देयर इज अ डिफरेंस बिटवीन द बिहेवियर ऑफ the teachers from rural areas compared to the urban areas. So, and and you said that even though one would expect the rural people, since they are more near to agriculture, to be more responsive to your program, but it's not the case. तो आपको क्या लगता है कि मतलब इसका कारण क्या है?
Thank you, Amit ji, for the question. So, ये जो मैंने शेयर किया था, this is not me specifically saying it. ये तमिलनाडु में एक स्टडी हुई थी रिसेंटली. सर्वे
Okay,
किया था टीचर्स को रूरल और अर्बन एरियाज में, एंड ये फ्रंटियर्स इन न्यूट्रिशन में पब्लिश हुआ था, जहाँ पे
okay,
उन्होंने ये देखा. हमारे प्रोग्राम में भी हमने दोनों रूरल और अर्बन एरियाज में काम किया है. एंड आई वुड से
okay,
एनवायरमेंट में ये फर्क है कि अर्बन स्कूल्स में ना बहुत अपॉर्चुनिटीज होते हैं टीचर्स के पास बच्चों के साथ प्रोग्राम करने के लिए. यूजुअली लैंग्वेज का कोई प्रोग्राम चल रहा होता है, साइंस का भी हो जाता है, कोई एक्सटर्नली आके बच्चों के साथ इन्वायरमेंट के बारे में भी बात करेगा. तो आई थिंक टीचर्स देखते हैं कि बच्चों के पास एक्सपोजर बहुत होता है. अर्बन स्कूल्स में ये भी होता है दैट वो आसपास में किसी ऑफिस या इंडस्ट्रियल सेंटर में भी विजिट अरेंज कर लेते हैं. तो बोथ बच्चों और टीचर को थोड़ा, आई थिंक, ज्यादा एक्सपोजर होता है इंफॉर्मेशन को लेके एंड अपॉर्चुनिटीज को लेके, जो रूरल एरियाज में शायद इतना ना हो. सो आई थिंक दैट्स वन ऑफ द रीजंस की शायद हम ये देख रहे हैं दैट urban teachers felt कि they are more confident trying to lead programs like this. That being said, I mean, it's also one study and in one specific state. I don't know if we can say that it applies across the state. Uh, Rural areas, maybe we have seen teachers are very dedicated, they're very committed. They also want to bring about change in the school. I'm taking this session today while I'm in Bikaner visiting some of our schools. And for example, some of the schools I visited this week, उन्होंने इंडस्ट्री एक्सपोजर पे बहुत फोकस किया है. अगर आप देखें तो बच्चे बैंक्स विजिट कर रहे हैं, इंश्योरेंस कंपनीज विजिट कर रहे हैं, बिकॉज वो करियर्स वो बच्चों को थोड़ा और ज्यादा अपॉर्चुनिटीज के बारे में बताना चाह रहे हैं. तो बदल रहा है और कुछ स्टेट्स में है कि ये सब हो रहा है. बट दिस इज जस्ट वन स्टडी. आई एम श्योर इट डिफर्स फ्रॉम रीजन टू रीजन.
okay. Thank you very much.
Archana, I had one question, maybe interesting for the full group, which is, how does a school get identified to become part of your food literacy education? Is it part of a broader outreach program? Are there instances where, a school has contacted Nourishing Schools and said, we've heard about this, we want to do it, aap aa jaiye? Just curious.
Thank you. That's a great question. So we work closely with government departments. So that's often a starting point for identifying the schools, where we ask them that if we want to work in a particular district, what are some schools that we should target? And they help us also prepare the list depending on their priorities. For instance, they may want to pick the model schools or schools that they know are more engaged with programs like this. So that's one factor. Second is even at the higher level, when we're thinking about which districts to work in, which states to work in, we look at a lot at the data that's already out there about various indicators, use that to narrow it down. The third is that you have to look at local relationships. So that's where working with all these different NGOs is really helpful. They help us identify some schools where a principal, for instance, really wants programs to come to school and provide opportunities to children. And then we reach out and we have that conversation. So that's a factor as well. And also coming back to the government aspect, we're trying to look at alignment with government programs as well. So there is a school health and wellness program that's being rolled out. We're trying to overlap with the schools that they are reaching out to as well, so on and so forth. Have schools also come to us and said that they want to do it? Yes, that's also happened. And I think we're also figuring out how to do that even better. So, for instance, with government schools, right now, we can't just cover one government school in a district. If we're going there, it makes sense to cover at least 20 to 40 schools to be able to roll out the full program. So, one school approaching us can be the catalyst, but then we try and see how can we build a bit bigger program around that. That's more on the government school side. I think with private school side also, we're trying to figure out ways to keep them engaged over time. We ran a competition a couple of years back in schools and colleges called the Fit and Fun Ideas Challenge, where we invited students to give us ideas for the resource kit. What are kind of games and activities that we can do? So that was something where we went in and conducted short sessions with students. And it was great for private schools as well, because it was a very contained engagement, but gave their children the opportunity to also come up with ideas, be creative, and so on. We're thinking about doing something similar. So there's been that aspect to it as well, and we would love to do more there.
Great. Thank you. I mean, it's really, it's very important work, but one can only imagine how much effort it is also, to reach out, to sustain the energy of the program over 2 years, to have a sense of, is it working or not? Is there impact? But because it's been done at such a foundational level, I suppose we should, hope that the learning will stay with the students after they've also become adults, by which time the food environment would have changed even further, than it already has.
Absolutely. And that's why we also keep it partnership led. There are instances where we would have finished our direct program in a school, say 3 or 4 years ago. But when we go back to those areas, the school gardens are still running, community gardens are still running.
Yeah.
Older kids have taught the younger kids because we leave the resource kit in the school. We want them to keep using it. And
Yes.
also, that's why it's such a partnership led model, because, like you said, keeping it sustained in the school, engaging them, doing the outreach, it's very difficult for one organization to do it alone. And I believe that even if one organization could do it alone, they shouldn't, because everyone should kind of play to their strengths, right? An NGO that's been working in a particular set of districts for the last 10, 20 years is much better equipped to go out and help identify the key nodal points in the community than an organization that's working more at a national level like we are. So I think it's also about everybody creating that combination of strengths that they bring to something like this to help us sustain the impact.
Makes sense. Maybe one last.
I'm very curious about just one thing. When you introduce the children to, say, sustainable food, for example, grains, I really want to know what the conversation would be like when you're having with the children. What are you all talking about?
So, Dhanya, I think introducing something new can often be quite difficult. So, we look at what is already there. So, for instance, in different parts of Rajasthan, millets have always been such a essential part of the traditional diet that's been there. We look more at connecting back to foods like that they are already familiar with. You look at a state like Assam, where rice is a staple crop. There, I think the approach would be that they have so many different varieties of green leafy vegetables. And we look a lot more at promoting something like that. Let the children get familiar with those foods, or rather, refamiliarized with those foods, and then use that to build further. I mean, even if you take something like rice, we talk about sustainable grains. One of the big discoveries for me has been that we only see rice as one or two varieties, right? But there are so many varieties of rice, and there are some varieties of rice that are more sustainable than others. They have been a part of the diet and can be something that you make a lot more popular and so on. So I think start from where they are, not from where we are coming in and sharing something different, and then build the conversation from there. It works better with parents, and that works better with children as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the work you're doing.
Thank you. It's a pleasure for us to be a part of this.
Just right on the dot. So, Rutuja, maybe you want to help us wrap up.
Yes, thank you so much for attending. Thank you so much, Archana, for your time. It's really exciting to see people who've been working in this space for a really long time and building it that way because, yeah, it gives a lot of, it makes me less cynical and more hopeful about the whole ecosystem at large. Yeah, I also wanted to share for our youth network a registration link. Um, in case you haven't already joined the Food Systems Youth Network, you can register here. Yes. Sorry, just putting it in the chat. 1 second. Seems like I can't put anything in the chat. But yes, I think everyone here is on the WhatsApp group anyway, so it should not be an issue.
Rutuja, you are co-host, so you should be able to ping, but I will put the link in the group.
Okay, do you need the link? Yeah, okay. Yeah, here's the link.
All right. Thanks so much, Archana. Thank you all for joining. And we'll have the Archana will share the recording. I mean, we'll kind of share the link back with you in case there's, groups that you want to share it with in your network. Please feel free to. It'll be on YouTube, so easily accessible to anyone.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And thank you again for inviting me for this session.
Bye.
Thank you.